If you live in today's world, this graph should concern you. It shows you the wealth of the top 1%, and it's rising and rising and rising. Today, I want to talk about how we came to this situation, a situation where today Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, and Bill Gates own more than the poorest 50% in America. That is, 3 people own more than the poorest 165 million combined. Let's talk about wealth inequality. In a capitalist system, there are 2 ways you can make money: labor income and capital income. Labor income is income that you use using your own time. That's most of us. I make videos on YouTube, other people are construction workers at construction sites. On the other hand, capital income is the income you generate by using your own capital. That is, you for instance take 100 euros, invest them, and after a year this money has grown to 105 euros. You have made 5 euros in capital income, and very few of us generate their major income share from capital. And this structure of capitalism, labor income and capital income, can be very dangerous. There are very powerful forces within that system and structure that can create inequality. And to understand this, I want to introduce you to this guy, Ben DuPont. He's worth at least $12 million, and you might recognize his name. He's from the famous DuPont family. 6 generations ago, one of his relatives, Eleuthère Irene DuPont, founded DuPont Company in 1802. The company was the first major producer of gunpowder in the US and quickly became one of the most valuable companies in history. What does this thing in 1800 have to do with Ben DuPont's wealth today? Well, the major reason that Ben DuPont is richer than most of us is returns on capital. Returns on capital are a very, very strong force pushing us from equality of wealth to inequality of wealth. Let me explain. Eleuthère Irene DuPont was a brilliant chemist and businessman, and the company he started was worth $10,000 at the time of his death. His labor income grew to a wealth of $10,000. Now, if you invest in financial markets, this money grows 6 to 7% on average. And that is exactly how the value of DuPont Company grew in the last 200 years. Eleuthère Irene DuPont has built a little wealth in 1800. And 200 years later, that wealth has grown insanely. DuPont's equity today is worth $30 billion. And if you ask why, well, it's just a fact of the capitalist system. In our world, people need money to make new projects, and they're willing to give you interest rates if you lend them money. And the average interest rates in our system, well, they are about 5 to 7%. So if someone in your family has one genius idea and builds wealth, this wealth grows and grows over centuries. And you can bet that Ben DuPont's net worth today has a lot to do with the inheritance he got and the money his great-great-great-great-grandfather made. And this is, by the way, one of the major reasons whites are nearly 8 times richer than black people in the US. Remember, the black population was enslaved to a large extent, and until the end of slavery, all wealth was in the hands of white people. And the wealth difference from that time carried over and perpetuated to today. Whites are a lot more wealthy than blacks because they can build on more wealth from their ancestors. Okay, so now we've established that capital is very powerful and returns of capital can generate inequality. But of course, there are also forces in our system that push towards more equality. And a very simple one is growth of the population. Once again, look at Ben DuPont. He does not own DuPont Company for himself. He is not worth 30 billion. Why? Well, there are over 50 people in his family tree he has to share this wealth with. An important example of that is what historians call the practice of gavelkind. In the cultures of France, Anglo-Saxon England, and Scandinavia, farmland was distributed equally among all sons. So see what that leads to. Let's say there's a very rich landowner and he has 7 sons, which is not uncommon during that time. So the land is divided among those 7 sons. And let's say now each of those 7 sons has 5 sons each. That means this land is parted once again. And 2 generations later, the wealth of the very rich grandfather has almost disappeared. It is very distributed now among his ancestors. Another very important factor pushing towards equality is economic growth. Let's imagine the following scenario. We're living in a world where the total economy is worth 10 million and your father is a millionaire. That means you own 1/10 or 10% of the world. But now someone makes an amazing discovery, electricity, and this sparks incredible economic growth. Artificial light allows people to work more, and the production in the following years is absolutely incredible. Houses are built using electric machinery, natural resources are mined at an enormous pace, and 20 years later, the value of the economy has grown to 1 billion. Now, the fortune of your father is still there, it's 10 million, but now it's only 0.1% of global wealth. So suddenly, the wealth distribution in the world is a lot more equal. So let's get back to our framework and see where we're at right now. And what I now present to you is the argument of one of the most famous economists right now, Thomas Piketty. He says, let's try to estimate what these numbers, return on capital, population growth, and economic growth, are going to be in the 21st century. I mean, the growth rate of capital has always been around 5 to 6 to 7%. That is how financial investments grew on average during the last 200 years, so that is quite intuitive to think that that will continue in the future. Population growth, well, that's about 1% per year. And economic growth, realistic numbers for this century are between 1 and 2% per year. So what does that mean? The return on capital, which Piketty calls R, which is between 5 and 7%, is larger than growth G. Why? Because population growth, about 1%, and economic growth, about 2%, equals 3%, and that is not as large as 5%. And that is where Piketty has his famous inequality formula, R larger G. And what he's saying is that in the 21st century, the forces pushing towards inequality will be larger than the forces pushing towards equality. Now, that is only Thomas Piketty's argument. I want to know what you think about that. Please let me know in the comments below. And in part 2 of this little video series, I'm going to share my personal opinion on what Thomas Piketty is saying, and we're going to talk about if there's something we need to change in our system and what that could be.